I'm going to be showing you all a bird of myth and legend, and also one of Europe's most mysterious birds. It is the barn owl. Now, barn owls are one of Europe's most mysterious and elusive birds. And of course, they're like all owls. They have some of the best hearing of any animal. And of course, they're also very silent as they fly. And that's all down to the feathers along the edges of their feathers, along their wings, because those feathers give the owl its silent flight. And also, its heart-shaped face plays a role in its hunting. And that's almost like a satellite dish, because the ears are located just around these sides of the eyes. And of course, when you see an owl doing this, that particular distinctive movement, that's basically judging the distance of noise and their relationship to the ears to see which side of the noise is coming from strongest. And of course, another thing about the barn owl is that, unlike other owls that usually hoot, it doesn't hoot, it gives a loud screech, like a loud... It's actually quite frightening. In fact, it's actually believed that the barn owl is the reason people in the Middle Ages believed in ghosts and banshees. Because try to imagine, like, you're a knight or a soldier out on castle battlements at dusk time, the sun's going down, there's an eerie mist across the valley, and then you see this white shape soaring across the land, and this loud hissing screech comes from it. And it's no wonder people believed in ghosts and banshees, but also owls have occasionally been associated with witches, because witches are said to be able to turn into owls, and of course an old superstition is that if an owl flies past your window, when it's night time, and if you have the window open slightly and you hear its call, it probably means you're going to die. I mean, that's just superstitious rubbish. And of course, barn owls are of no danger to us as humans, but they are a living nightmare for animals like rodents that can be field voles, mice, rats, shrews, but also small birds, lizards, frogs, so pretty much anything small they can catch. Of course, as I said, they have incredible hearing, so they can hear the slightest rustle in the long grass, and of course their silent wings mean that their prey doesn't hear them coming until it's too late. But their hearing can also be a weakness, especially when it starts to rain, because even if it's only spitting, the barn owl finds it very hard to hear its prey because of the droplets coming from all directions. It gets very, very hard for them to pinpoint their prey. And of course, barn owls, as their name suggests, they nest in barns, but I mean, the typical nesting site for a barn owl would be a hole in a hollow tree, or as its namesake suggests, the rafters of a barn, or in outbuildings, churches, or any other man-made structures. Of course, barn owls are, like many birds, mate for life, and they're loyal mates, bonding for life, so when one of the pair dies, the other will often wait a year before finding another mate. They usually have 8 to 10 chicks called owlets, and of course the male and the female will always take it in turns to look after them and bring food back for them, because owls swallow their prey whole in one go, so because they either can't chew their food or they don't waste time just ripping it apart. And of course, the parts of their prey they can't digest, like feathers, fur, bones and skulls are regurgitated in what's called a pellet, and that usually contains feathers, fur and bones from the animal they fed on. And of course, another thing about owls is how you tell when they come, what kind of time of day they come out. Like a barn owl, because it has black eyes, that means it's crepuscular, so it's active at dusk and dawn. But with a long-eared owl, a short-eared owl, or a little owl who have yellow eyes, that means they're diurnal, so they come out in the daytime. But an owl that has orange eyes is nocturnal, which means it comes out at night. Of course, one of the only times you see barn owls out in daylight is when there's either chicks to feed or when food is scarce. And unfortunately, the barn owls quite often get hit by cars when they hunt beside roads, because unlike kestrels that hover, barn owls soar quite low over above the ground, and of course quite often that leads to them accidentally being hit by cars because the bright headlights just dazzle them, and it quite often means the drivers are unable to stop, and the owl gets hit by a car, and of course the driver is then quite often racked with guilt. But barn owls are not endangered in Britain. I mean, like the peregrine, they are widespread throughout the Northern Hemisphere, but they are closely monitored by the RSPB. And to this day, they remain one of Britain's most elusive and secretive birds. Here is their range. Before I move on, I'm going to show you the other British owls. There's the barn owl, and then there's the tawny owl. Now, barn owl and tawny owls, they're both crepuscular because they both have black eyes. And then there's the short-eared owl and the little owl, both diurnal, yellow eyes. And then the largest, the long-eared owl, and they have orange eyes because they're nocturnal, which means they come out at night. But those aren't actually ears at all, they're just feathery tufts. Now, the next animal I'm going to show you is probably our most elusive bird of prey. It is the goshawk. Now, goshawks are the largest hawk in the British Isles, and they're also one of our most elusive birds of prey, because they were wiped out in Britain around the 1940s, but thanks to British falconers, they have made a comeback since the 1960s. But of course, they prefer to live deep in woodland along fields, as far away from people. And of course, they are slowly making a comeback, but even so, they are still very, very hard to find. Of course, when I was a kid, I was always quite frightened of goshawks, mainly because of the eyes, because they have orange burning eyes, and that always frightened me when I was little. Because goshawks in the medieval era were actually the second most common bird of prey used in falconry, because it was flown by the yeoman, and of course goshawk was known as the cook's bird for the amount of prey it could catch. Of course, the goshawk will feed on anything it can find. It will take pigeon, duck, goose, grouse, pheasant, partridge, ptarmigan, and squirrel and rabbit, and even the big females can catch hares. I mean, we still use goshawks in falconry today, but they are a one-man hunting bird and quite a stressful bird, so we don't fly them in big displays. And goshawks, like the sparrowhawks, are ambush predators, so And of course, where they tend to live in woodland, it tends to be, and the trees tend to be very, very tightly packed together. And so, like as you can see here, goshawks can actually fold their wings in close to the body to fit through a gap that's probably no bigger than their own body. And of course, they can dodge and weave in between trees to grab their prey. I mean, if you were a bird or a rabbit and saw all those talons coming at you like that, it would be the last thing you see. And goshawks mate for life, like all birds of prey, and of course they usually have 2 or 4 chicks in a breeding season, and of course their nest is usually on a conifer tree, like a pine tree, and it's a big, big structure, which is usually made of sticks and leaves and feathers, and occasionally has the bones and body parts of prey they bring back. Of course, while goshawks are slowly making a comeback in the rest of Britain, they are still very, very hard to see, and of course, quite often the only time you know that they're around is when you hear the rustling of leaves and the alarm calls of other forest animals. And here is their range. So you can see there's a dense population of them in Wales and around the north of England. And of course, small patches of them in Scotland and around the rest of Britain. I mean, as I said, they're slowly making a comeback. For another bird of myth and legend, it is the raven. Now, ravens are the largest of the crow family. In fact, a fully grown adult could grow to be probably about 1.5 meters long, and they have a wingspan of about 1 meter long. And they're also very, very intelligent birds. In fact, it's said that they have problem-solving intelligence, and that they can even mimic human speech. I can actually say that they do mimic human speech, because a few years ago when I was at Shrewsbury, I walked past a raven enclosure where the falconry birds were, and I heard a very deep voice go, "Hello," and I nearly had a friggin' heart attack, and it was the raven that did that. Of course, the easiest way to see a raven is to go here to the Tower of London. That's because in the reign of King Charles II, tame birds were brought to London, to the Tower of London, to be kept there, because of the ancient superstition that their presence protects London from invasion. And of course, ravens are found in Britain because they're mostly found in the uplands and cliffs of northern England, Wales, the Highlands of Scotland and Ireland. I mean, while the raven is still absent from a fair amount of lowland Britain, they are slowly making a comeback to the rest of Britain. And of course, ravens pair for life, and they will quite often do a very interesting courtship display to find a partner. In fact, early in the year, a male and a female will put on a breathtaking aerobatic show where they chase each other, tumble and dive, and even roll right over onto their backs in mid-air with wings almost closed. But unfortunately, like eagles and other raptors, the raven has been perceived as a threat to sheep and game birds. Of course, their scavenging nature means they tend to go for the sick or injured, but also ravens have quite often been associated with bad omens like death and all that, so quite often people will kill ravens if they see them because they still consider them bad omens.